The Holy Gospel of Jesus Christ according to Matthew. Jesus said, "If another member of the church sins against you, go and point out the fault when the two of you are alone. If the member listens to you, you have regained that one. But if you're not listened to, take one or two others along with you, so that every word may be confirmed by the evidence of 2 or 3 witnesses. If the member refuses to listen to them, tell it to the church. And if the offender refuses to listen even to the church, let such a one be to you as a Gentile and a tax collector. Truly I tell you, whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. Again, truly I tell you, if 2 of you agree on earth about anything you ask, it will be done for you by my Father in heaven. For where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, I am there among you." Jesus was always telling stories. He was a rabbi, a holy man, and rabbis were known for their sayings and parables. It's how they communicated with their disciples and with others in the community around them. Rabbis weren't like everyone else. They were these mystical characters who served to root the culture in the scriptures and keep their attention focused on God and his ways. They were set apart for a particular purpose, and Jesus wasn't just your run-of-the-mill rabbi. He was someone who stood out mostly because of his countercultural teachings that really flew in the face of the traditional teachings of the time. Things about Jewish society and rules and concepts about what God expected of people and what God was ultimately up to. Right before today's reading, Jesus had just finished the parable of the lost sheep. Let's say a shepherd has 100 sheep and one of them gets lost. Naturally, the shepherd leaves the rest of the flock and sets off to find this one sheep that lost its way. And when he finds it, the shepherd is happier about finding this lost sheep than he is about the fact that the rest of the flock never wandered off in the first place. If you really care about your sheep, it makes sense. Jesus even says, "It's not the will of my Father that any of these little ones should perish." And then launches into these instructions about dealing with people who have lost their way. Jesus lays out this methodical way of dealing with someone who has done something to offend you, who has sinned against you. Because human beings are broken. We are these beautiful contradictions of unique bearers of the image and spirit of God and representatives of the true brokenness of humanity that is entirely dependent on the redemptive reality of Christ. We hold these things together in ourselves, and there is this tension that pulls at us our entire lives and results in moments of unbelievable joy and also desperate pain, particularly when we interact with each other in relationships. You may have heard this before. First, he says you go to this person who has offended you alone, one-on-one, and explain it, point it out. If they listen and things are resolved, then the relationship is preserved and everything's good. If they don't listen, there's still a disagreement, take a few others back with you and have another sit-down conversation. What's going on here is that you're involving other wisdom and other perspectives than your own. And if that doesn't work and there's still an issue, involve the wider community. Everyone weighs in and becomes aware of what's going on. So at each stage of this methodology, the stakes are raised and more emphasis is placed on bringing whatever it is that happened into the light and before the wisdom of the wider community. Ultimately, if there's no resolution and something really difficult has gone on, Jesus gives a final direction. If the offender refuses to listen even to the community, let such a one be to you as a Gentile and a tax collector. I don't know if you've noticed, but there's a lot of disagreement going on these days. There's a lot of offending going on these days. I mean, all you have to do is log on to Facebook for a second, and you're likely to be offended by something or even caught in a disagreement. Everyone's opinion is constantly on display. And I'm really thankful for the freedom of speech that we have and the right to say what we think so far without fear of any kind of reprisal or punishment. But one of the results of these freedoms is that you have all sorts of diverse opinions and actions that come from those opinions. Before social media, you used to have an actual face-to-face conversation to figure out how people felt about things. Now, it's just too easy to click that unfriend button and cast that person out of your social circle. Just cut them off, because it's easier to deal with life if you don't have to be offended by the opinions or the actions of someone else. The art of the conversation is becoming a rare commodity, and the divisions in our society are growing deeper and wider. Political divisions, social divisions, religious divisions, and when our feathers get ruffled, we skip these steps designed to preserve relationships and provide dignity and respect for everyone involved. And if the offending party is offensive enough, we move right to the end and treat that person like a Gentile or a tax collector without even asking what Jesus really meant when he said that. Starting with the son of the centurion man in Matthew 8 and the Canaanite woman's daughter in chapter 15, we see this shift happening in the way Jesus understood his mission. Even in Matthew's list of the family history of Jesus, in the very beginning of the gospel, we see no less than 4 Gentile women who figure prominently. And that's just in Matthew. Look at the other gospels, and we start to see this echo of inclusion for those who are not Jews into this epic story of the incarnation of Christ. It's a good thing, too, because I dare say that most of us here are Gentiles. And tax collectors, Zacchaeus, you come down, or I'm going to your house today. As a kid, I was taught how Jesus hung out with people of ill repute, sinners, people on the fringes of society, those struggling with addictions, harlots, yes, and even tax collectors. And lest we forget, the one whose name this gospel book bears, Matthew, was a tax collector, called to follow Jesus while he was at work. So you can imagine when Jesus gave his final bit of advice here, his eyes playfully glancing over at Matthew with a grin, and he says, "Let such a person be to you as a Gentile or a tax collector." Jesus, more and more towards the end of his ministry on earth, was turning the social and political culture of his day upside down. First was last, last was first. This one who was called master by his disciples was the very one who took on the role of a servant and willingly gave his life to show us this pattern of giving oneself in service to others in order to find true life. So why would we even imagine after all of that, that Jesus would tell us just to write these people off, to distance them and to place them outside of social interaction, ostracized by their community. Jesus turned that social norm around and showed us that there is no limit to forgiveness for our brothers and sisters. Just as God's redemption knows no boundaries or end, our responsibility to our brothers and sisters is to extend our hearts and hands endlessly to them in love and in acceptance. Just as Jesus expanded his mission to the hearts and minds of Gentiles and tax collectors, we are Gentiles and tax collectors. And if we can testify to anything, it's that Jesus has redeemed even us. And we have not been pushed away, but brought near to the heart of God, and even defined by the incarnation of Christ. May we remember where we came from. We've all gone astray like that sheep. May we work to extend God's endless love in the face of whatever offense we encounter, so that we don't lose anyone. Amen.